Welcome to the Pursuit of Growth show. My name is Greg Brinkley. On this presentation, we focus on engaging conversations with fascinating individuals that we admire, whose lives inspire us to continue to pursue self-development and personal growth. We'll discuss our personal and professional lives, our passions, our successes, failures, lessons learned, and ultimately wrap up with key takeaways from the conversation. I'm joined by my co-host and partner in crime, Sammy Gonzalez. What's up, Sammy?
Hey, Greg, it's really good to hear from you today. I know we've been talking a lot about the Pursuit of Growth show, and this is a long time coming to finally get to reboot this and have on some amazing guests. And the best part about this for all the viewers out there is that this is totally just kind of one-on-one conversations here. So whatever comes out of our mouths, we're not going to edit this out. So you're going to get real conversation. You're going to get real questions, real answers from some fascinating people. And that leads me to who is sitting just below me on my screen is a really good friend of mine and a great person to be around. His name is Willie Baronet. And I want to give probably the world's shortest bio because as we were doing some research on Willie, we wanted to keep it short and sweet because we have a lot to get to. But my connection to Willie goes back, many years now, in which we met through the cross paths of nonprofits and creativity and creative mornings here in Dallas. And so he's someone that I was immediately drawn to, someone that I felt like I just had an amazing connection with. And your LinkedIn profile, the tagline or headline probably says it best, is that you are an artist, you're an activist, you are a professor, and you're a curious dreamer. And I think that really sums up the best bio that we could find on you. So first and foremost, maybe share what those words really mean about you in your own words.
Well, first of all, thank you both for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you guys tonight. And I know we were going to do this some time ago, and then, hey, a pandemic happened. So, it was late in my life that I felt confident or comfortable enough to even call myself an artist, even though I spent an entire career on the creative side of advertising. There was something about the word artist that was intimidating to me. And it wasn't really until I went back to grad school and felt like I put, both feet in that boat for a while that I was willing to even call myself that. And what that means to me is that I'm willing to take some risks with creativity, to use that creativity to tell stories or to share what I want to share with folks. The activist part came up for me when we were shooting our documentary. A friend of mine in San Francisco literally over a burrito said, "So are you an activist?" And I had never once even thought that. And the more I thought about it, the truth is that I was doing work that is activism. And I am a professor by trade, even though I used to be an advertising person. Now I am a full-time professor and a curious dreamer. I think I've been a curious dreamer since I can remember being alive. Curiosity is one of the traits I really am happy that I have. And I happen to think it connects people to their creativity. So
yeah,
there you go. That's my explanation.
That's an amazing explanation. And knowing you and that having interacted with you on a variety of projects and a variety of social settings and just one-on-one interaction over pancakes. I think that really does sum it up very well. So I'm so excited that we put that in there. So one of the main things we wanted to ask you about, again, your career, I wanted to start off with talking a little bit about you being a professor first. And the first question we wanted to ask you was, tell us about a time in which you felt like you had an impact on one of your students.
Man, so first of all, that is why I teach. And I am really blessed, that I have a bunch of great students. And I really am lucky that I know I've had impact on a lot of them. They are kind enough to send me notes and things. One that really comes up for me is happened in London. So I've been teaching, I taught abroad in London for SMU in the summers for a couple of different years. And the last time I was there was a student named Maddie, and she knows who she is, was in my class in London, which is an intro to creativity class. And the beauty of the London abroad experience is that the class is really small. And one of the assignments I give in this class is that the students have to write and keep up a creativity blog over the course of the semester. Maddie was one of the quieter students in the class. And even though we spent 6 weeks together in London, I never really felt like I was, sometimes I feel like I'm not reaching some students. And so she was kind of quiet. At the very end of the class, as I'm looking through all the blogs, her final blog post was titled, "What Would Willie Do?" And I may start crying just talking about this, but she wrote the most profound, just a paragraph about the impact the semester had had on her, and that she was kind of asking some big questions about herself, and that I think it was partially because I had shared some of the We Are All Homeless project with her and with the other students, but it brought me to tears in that moment. And she and I instantly realized I had had some impact, and it was a surprise impact. So yeah, I would say that's one of the more recent ones.
Willie, I'm curious. We'll talk a little bit more later about your relationship with your students, and at least from my experience, how unique it is. When I went to school and I went to Texas A&M, I had wonderful professors, but they were my professors. I did not have relationships with them. I didn't ever feel really confident being able to have conversation with them outside of the classroom. And it's clear, and that story is a great example of it, that you really connect with your students. Can you share a little bit about what you think you do that actually makes those students feel comfortable and makes them feel important to be able to have a much closer relationship than what you may typically find at some other schools?
Sure. I think it's a couple of things. One, because I am teaching the creative track in advertising, I get a lot of students early on, and then I end up having them for 2, 3, 4 classes sometimes. So some of those students I really get to know really well. And by the time they graduate, I mean, I cry at every graduation. That's just how it goes. I think the second piece of this is probably that because I'm teaching creativity, it's a different kind of class in a lot of respects. And even my intro class, their final project is a design your own legacy project. And I'm gonna focus on that one because in some ways it's the one that goes deepest. We talk about them connecting to what their purpose is, why they are taking a valuable space on the planet, and what they're going to do with their time here. And I understand, at 20 years old or around that age, that their priorities are going to change, their interests are going to change. But in some ways, I want them to at least begin to focus on that sort of stuff. And so there are a couple of pretty deep pieces to that final project. It's not uncommon for the students to get choked up in class talking about it, and I often get choked up hearing about it. So I think that there's some genuine sharing that goes on during the semester, and I think that's part of why the students feel comfortable being themselves with me. And in some cases they will come in my office and vent about very personal things, or some things like that they may be a little afraid to bring up with their parents, like they want to change their major. Mm-hmm. And I get to be the bad guy and say, hell yeah, change your major.
Well, I think that's something that has always resonated with me so much, is that I instantly was just drawn to your welcoming nature. I mean, we discussed and we talked, and I think within the first 30 seconds I knew you, we'd already exchanged a hug. You know, it's like you're very inviting, you're very welcoming, and throughout the course of the time that I've known you, and from what I've seen from interactions, and I'm sure your students get this too. It's you're a very genuine person, and I smile when I say that, and anytime I even think of the name Willie, I smile because I truly have a great connection with you, but I also see that you make those connections with other people so easily. And I think it's because you are vulnerable and being able to share, you know, some of the things that you're feeling as well. And so like, you're the guy that can be the bad guy. You're the guy that can be the good guy. You know, you're the guy that'll cuss somebody out if they need it too, I'm sure. Right. So I really think that it's all in hand to hand with being a very genuine person.
Well,
Yeah, and, you know,
I appreciate that. And I will say too, I'm the oldest of 8. So being a big brother, I think in some ways is like getting prepared to both be a teacher and be a creative director. And I've been around the block a few times. I've made a lot of mistakes. And I will tell you that I've learned how to be more genuine and to be more authentic, even with myself. So believe me, it hadn't always been a bed of roses.
you know, and Willie, that leads me to a question. But first, I'll share that in the book that Sammy and I wrote, The Pursuit of Growth, we focus on 11 key areas of life that we believe universally people should be working to grow in. And one of those areas is love and service. How are we treating other people? How are we helping other people? Do we have growth goals? And do we have good habits and initiatives to be able to do that? And I think it goes without saying, for people that know you, they would rank that as probably one of your very, very big strengths. But I love how you shared, you know, that wasn't always the case. And I think that's, for all of us, it's a consistent struggle. Do you have an example that maybe something that's happened in your life that maybe you, whether it's failed at or you learned from, that has helped you to kind of adopt this mindset of it really is important and imperative to be able to serve others and help other people? And, you know, what's the first thing maybe that comes to your mind in terms of kind of lessons learned?
Well, I'm probably not special in saying this, but it would probably be dealing with some of my demons from my childhood. I had a rough relationship with my dad. I grew up terrified of him. I spent a lot of time as a young adult in therapy, and I think that was probably the beginning of me really waking up to being willing to at least start to own who I am. And it culminated in writing what I now call the Come to Jesus letter to my dad back in 1993. And, you know, I'm happy to say that what I was afraid was possibly going to end our relationship totally actually resulted in him writing me back, and it at least gave us a chance to heal some of the stuff from my childhood. But I really think that work, and that was a really intense few years for me, has fueled almost everything that has come afterwards. The other thing that's really significant to me is my mom passed away in 2003, and there's no way for me to put into words the impact her passing had on our family and on me personally. It truly changed what I cared about. I think in some ways that led me to deciding to sell my ad agency and really make the shift to going back to school, and which, you know, in turn really was where the We Are All Homeless project started and so forth. So, you know, it may seem kind of cliche, but it's really reckoning with both my parents that was really what I believe connected me to what I cared about. And that was some hard work, and lots of anger and sadness and fear got expressed during those years.
Yeah, that's I love that story. It's, you know, I think so many people, when we look at our childhood, so many of the issues that we have from our childhood carry over into our adulthood. And you know, we're going to talk about the We Are All Homeless project in a minute, which is just a fascinating, incredible initiative that you've put together. But you mentioned the risk you took in selling your ad agency and making the switch over to becoming a professor. How did you come to that decision? I know it was probably a passion project and wanting to be able to give back and be able to serve these children. But for people that are looking to make career changes or be able to kind of change the direction of their professional lives, that's a very intimidating roadmap to look at. How did you navigate that? How did you ultimately come to that decision?
Well, first of all, never call college students children. You will get called out super quick. Even though I sometimes act more like a child than anybody around here. The truth is, when I got clear that I wanted to sell the agency, and as I mentioned, it was sparked by my mom dying. Honestly, I had no clue that teaching was ahead for me. What I knew was that I wanted to dive into art and figure out what I wanted to say. And at that time I was painting and kind of didn't really know where that was going. But after selling the agency, I literally had 2 years where I bothered all of my friends to have coffee every day. And they were like, God, man, get something to do, So, and in one conversation with a gallery owner, I was trying to do some research, to just understand the art world. And it was during a conversation with a gallery owner that she was talking about her graduate school experience. And I was like, I'm going to grad school. And so I immediately began applying. I got turned down to some, I got accepted to some, was very excited to go to UTD. And truthfully, the idea of being a full-time professor didn't even occur to me till I had almost finished grad school.
Wow.
Because I was teaching part-time at TCU, oddly enough, at that time, while I'm a student at UTD. And it just occurred to me toward the end that I really like structure, that, I'm kind of a person that thrives with a little bit of structure. And teaching was just such a perfect way to get that. So I don't think I realized just how fulfilling it would be until I started doing it. And I, got to really, because before I'd done some adjunct teaching, which is awesome, but that's kind of one class here. And it's a different thing when I get to witness students really going through the program and being in classes with me multiple times.
Yeah, we've made reference multiple times about your previous career with inside advertising, and I think that's a good natural path into being able to teach creativity. Let's rewind just a little bit and go back to that career in advertising, and tell me a little. Did you have an early career path in mind when you started to go into advertising, or what led you down that path and then took you to owning your own agency? What was the spark, and then what helped you grow?
I started when I was an undergrad. I started in pre-law thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. A couple of semesters later, I changed my major to math for some reason, still unknown to me. 2 semesters later, I'm taking calculus 2 and going, I really love math, but why am I doing this? And I literally flipped through a course catalog, which back then was on paper.
Yeah, I remember.
And you remember those, huh? And I saw this major called advertising design. At this point in my life, I'd never taken an art class. I'd never taken any drawing classes or anything. I'd always enjoyed drawing and all of that, but it was a complete, I'm going to try this out. And since I was paying for my own college, I didn't have to answer to anybody. So I think my parents thought I was crazy. But I started and almost immediately realized, wow, I absolutely love this. I love the short attention span part of it. I love working on lots of different clients. I love solving problems. I love the competitive aspects of it. And I credit one of my professors, Dutch Kepler, who was, I went to University of Southwestern Louisiana, and he was the advertising program pretty much. And he would take us on field trips to Houston and Dallas to expose us to big markets. And that's when I think the possibilities started to gel in my head. A couple of my friends moved to Dallas, and they were like, "Get your portfolio and get to Dallas, man." And I did. And so I just started, and like a lot of people, I worked for various firms and worked my way up the ladder. Eventually, I was a creative director at a small agency, and it was while I was there and they were not doing well, and I saw the writing on the wall, that I met another guy and we decided to form a company back in 1992.
Wow. Yeah, that making that leap from that kind of nothing, no experience, no background. That's actually funny that you mentioned that, because I see a lot of similarities. When I was in high school, or actually, I think when I was applying to colleges, and I'm a Texas State graduate, Southwest Texas, while I was there. I graduated with a degree in Bachelor of Fine Arts in Communication Design. And so that was graphic design, and was
Yeah.
the main focus, right? And so, but the thing about that, if you ask anyone that knew me even growing up, they asked me like, "Well, you're not an artist, like you never did anything." And actually, I wanted to be on ESPN. I wanted to be a sports anchor because I love sports for one, but then two, they always look like they just had so much fun, just like talking to people and doing the funny commercials. And I got into a mass comm class, and it was a mass communications club meeting or something. So I went there, and I noticed all the guys looked the same. They all had the same part. They were all wearing the same type of ties. They were very straight laced in this mass communications club, because essentially they all wanted to be anchors. And I was like, okay, this is not what I want to do. So I actually, the one time I went to my college counselor to ask, like, what am I doing with my school career? She said, "Well, what do you like about it and everything?" We talked through it, and she goes, "Have you ever thought about advertising?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, I think that's what you like. I think you like that fun aspect of it." And all of this, we went on about it. She goes, "Have you ever thought about graphic design? Because you're pretty technical as well." I said, "No, actually, I've only taken one art class in my entire life, and it was sixth grade art. I did win a blue ribbon at the county fair for it, for a piece I entered. But yeah, that's kind of how I got my start. I graduated the graphic design degree, and I worked through graphic design as well. But it's funny how we parallel with that. But it was, again, I flipped through the course catalog, right? Find out what you're doing, having that, I don't know, just that kind of inspiration to try something different, try something new.
And what I wasn't trained for was running a business. And so that leap to running an agency, which I did for 15 years, was terrifying. And I primarily relied on what I'd learned by watching previous employers and the things they did well and the things they didn't do well. And the rest of it, luckily, I had accountants and CPAs and lawyers and other people to make sure I wasn't, uh, totally screwing stuff up. But yeah, the part that I loved was always the creative, solving the problems. I did eventually enjoy pitching new business and some of that as well, but being a creative director was the sweet spot for me. It's very much like what I do now as a professor. It's mentoring and teaching and sharing and nudging, encouraging, all the things.
Hmm.
And Willie, that actually set me up perfect for the next question that I wanted to ask you. Just in my conversations with people, throughout the city, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, so many people talk about, wanting to start their own business, and they want to be an entrepreneur. And they talk about the challenge, and maybe the fear they have is they have the passion to give towards the work, but their fear is, I have to also be the person that understands the finances, the person that understands the accounting, the person that handles all the admin, all these type of things. And so ultimately, you want to get to a point where you have a team of people that handle all the things that you're weak at to kind of give you the ability to focus on your strengths. But when you're just starting out, that's not in place. And so I'm just kind of curious to learn about your experience. How did you navigate those waters when you first started? And I'm guessing as a person who could pass Calculus 1 to get into Calculus 2, you obviously have a pretty good brain on you, but would love to still be able to kind of hear how you navigated those waters.
Well, a couple of things. One, the graphic design business is a pretty low cost of entry, in terms of you don't have to have a lot of stuff. I
Mhm.
think we had one computer and, some art supplies, and we had a very, very tiny office. Um, there are a couple of things. One, it sounds good to, being an entrepreneur sounds good. The truth of that is that a lot of people that it's not for everybody.
Mhm.
There's a lot of risk and, uh, I'd say risk is probably the thing more than any of the other things you mentioned about understanding finances and whatever, because you can hire for most of those things. But the fear part, the staying awake at night, wondering if your employees are going to lose their jobs because whatever, the company's not making enough money. That's something that I really wasn't prepared for, and it turns out I liked it because there's a competitiveness to that, but it cost me some sleep for sure. And the other thing was, like I said, having worked my way up, and I tell this to students who are thinking about starting a business like right out of the gate. I said there's a lot to be learned by, working for a few years and just witnessing what happens at other companies, because I really paid attention, to how people were managing people, to how they were compensating people. So that was stuff I paid attention to, and how they were selling, how they were pitching new business. Um, so some of that was just by observing and watching. And then luckily, I grew up in a family without much money. So I've never been one to waste a lot of money. I was much more frugal and,
Mhm.
I could get by on beans if I needed to. So
You definitely were set up to make sacrifices, no doubt about it.
yeah, truthfully, it didn't ever really feel that way. I felt incredibly lucky to be running a company and to, just all the experiences that came along with that. But there are some rough spots too.
Yeah, there's a lot of times I know that what we learn a lot in some of the leadership development courses that we've been lucky to be able to be part of too. It's all about that culture and that kind of environment that you have with your employees and your like your students too. It sounds like the natural leap from a business owner into a teacher or a professor was kind of your next phase of life. It seems like it was a natural integration, because I can see just the way you talk about, like, worrying about your employees and thinking about them and guiding them, whatever that may be, and then thinking about the way you talked about your students, like being able to help them and encourage them and be that trusted advisor. So for me, like, those pieces just kind of interweave themselves and just really make a whole lot of sense, by you being able to take that kind of next step.
Yeah, totally. And the same traits, and thankfully now I think I learned a lot, because I have some early employees that would probably tell you that I was a bit of a dick in the beginning. And, I think I was trying to be a tough uh, creative director. And I think as I learned that there's ways to nuance, to kick somebody in the butt when that needs to happen, because there are times when what people need is, some strong boundaries and some,
Mhm.
uh, to be
Accountability,
tough.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, there are people that's what they really respond to. And at the same time, I think encouragement and praise and knowing how to really nudge people along and try to find the good stuff in their thumbnails, to help the good ideas come out. I learned a lot about the nuance of creative direction. I think it's really not, it's a tough thing for people to do well. And I just, made a lot of mistakes early on, and luckily nobody ended up hating me as a result of it. But I definitely got better at it. And I think now my students get to benefit from a lot of those lessons too.
Yeah, and I had someone tell me years and years and years ago, in terms of management, that it's always a difficult path of being stern but empathetic, being direct, being kind, holding people accountable, making sure the boundaries are in place. And one of the things that he told me was there are going to be circumstances where you've got to be very direct and stern, but you do it with kindness, but you've really got to deliver sometimes some tough messages. But then you need to then make it a habitual part of your job to then go back to that person and make sure that you're encouraging them tenfold after you've had that conversation with them, because you've got to have that positive reinforcement that opens up the ability to be creative and makes people feel safe and valued and important. So I love how, you talk about that and have all those things together. And to hear someone describe you as a dick, it just makes me laugh. And so, of course, I didn't know Willie Baronet 20 years ago. So that's an interesting thing to hear you say.
Well, we've laughed about it. I have some old friends. In fact, one person who was a student in the very first class I ever taught, she and I have been friends now for, God, I don't know how many years, but she had a very successful career as a designer and production person. And she's one of the people who we would get together and she would say, yeah, you're a whole lot nicer now, I can tell.
Well, I can only imagine that over the last 20 some odd years, one of the things that probably has helped you to grow into the person that you are now is We Are All Homeless. And that's actually how I came to know you. And I'd love for you, for our audience, maybe to give kind of your story of how We Are All Homeless came together. And I think Sammy and I both want to ask you some questions. I mean, we could probably keep you here all night asking you questions about We Are All Homeless. But also we want to talk about Signs of Humanity. And actually I watched it again last night. And it impacted me just as much as it did the first time that I saw it. But for our audience that's learning about you for the first time, share a little bit about We Are All Homeless and how that came to be.
Yeah, so it started basically back in, and there's probably some connection here. Also in 1993, the same time I wrote this letter to my dad, that was about the time that I first started to see people on the street corners holding signs. And like, I think a lot of people, I felt awkward, uncomfortable, afraid, wasn't really sure what to do, how to help, all of that sort of thing. And like a lot of people, I found ways to avert my eyes and pretend to be playing with the radio and avoid them. And I didn't like how that felt. And so for some weird reason, the idea occurred to me, I wonder if they would sell me their signs. And I don't even know what I thought that was going to do, but it began in 93 and I literally, it completely shifted the dynamic. All of a sudden I had something to talk about and we were connecting as human beings. And the truth is that became something I just never stopped doing. That was 27 years ago. I just happen to have in my office here. This is a sign Tanya, my significant other, bought and gave to me a couple of days ago. Another former employee of mine I met for coffee, he brought me 2 signs, and literally they're in my office because I just now got them. But I buy signs all the time. So that's how it started. So I started buying signs without any real plan. I did kind of think about using them for art purposes. And in the early time, I remember actually drawing on a couple of them and painting on a couple of them and ruining some perfectly good signs. And it wasn't until, 16 years later that I start grad school. And by this time I've got a bunch of signs, and it's while I am in school and talking to some of my professors. And when I showed them that I had this collection, they essentially, in nice words, said, forget painting, man, you got to do something with those signs. And so I really took that to heart. And in lots of my classes, I started to find ways to develop this as a project. And it was while I'm in grad school. This is probably 2008. Uh, yeah, 2008 that I first wrote down "We Are All Homeless," and I immediately went online to see if the URL was available, and it was. So I bought it, and I've had it ever since then. I started a blog almost immediately just to kind of track what was going on with this, and so yeah, in 2009 was my first art show using the signs, and so it just continued. And 2012, I did my first TEDx talk about it. And that was probably the time when I started to realize this thing may be bigger than I think it is, just because of what people were telling me. That led me to 2 years later, with a friend of mine, planning this trip across the country. And at the time, we thought, oh, we'll just buy signs going across the country. And I mean, yeah, maybe we'll shoot a little bit of footage, and maybe we'll post some of that. And that led to another friend of mine who was very interested in the project, stepping up and saying, look, I want you to make a feature-length documentary, and I'm going to fund this, or at least fund a big chunk of it. And so we started to raise money in earnest to produce the documentary, and ended up with 4 people instead of 2 traveling across the country with lots of cameras, iPhones, you name big cameras and little cameras. And we were just, it was a very guerrilla style thing. And that led, and then 2 years after that, we finally finished the editing for Signs of Humanity, which now only recently is on Amazon Prime. So we're excited about that. But all of that it's just, it started a snowball that has not stopped for quite some time. And, we got some crazy media attention, several videos that went viral, that other people produced about the project. And that in turn caused people from all over the place to contact me about doing an exhibit and, coming to speak about the project and stuff like that. In fact, I just, before I got on with you guys, have an email in my inbox. The most recent exhibit has been at the Anchorage Museum in Anchorage, Alaska. And she was emailing me to say, we just deinstalled the entire exhibit and have 6 big boxes to ship to you. So yeah, that's a very typical kind of exchange, but that's the most current one. And so, yeah, it's kind of a thing that's just fed on itself, and the impact from it continues to come in. And it's just another, I can't believe it a lot of the time. It's just how people respond to it. And again, I think it's really just the power of these signs, and the fact that these are representative of these stories of people on the streets, that a lot of us, it's just so easy to want to turn away.
Yeah, I think it's very.
Go ahead, Sammy.
I was just gonna say, I think it's very representative too of the nature of those people. Like their voices are not often heard but seen. And so just today, actually, I was driving over to work, and I saw a guy, and he was making a sign, and I had never seen someone so frantically scribbling and drawing. And the scene is so vivid to me because it happened this morning, but he was, cutting up the cardboard, and he was drawing on it, and the intensity that he was looking and working on this made me, reminded me about the fact that, like, a lot of the signs that you have, and even in the movie Signs of Humanity, when you're having these conversations with people, it's like you're really but you're allowing yourself to have a piece of that person. And so the stories that are connected, through that sign, and I could only imagine, because the light turned green and I had to go, but I almost rolled down the window and asked him, but the light turned green too fast, and I could tell he was just frantically trying to make something. So, but what are some of those times in which you encounter those people, or maybe do you have a sign or two that has really stood out in your travels?
Oh, so many.
Because I've been to your office, so I know how many. I've been to your office, so I know how many signs you have, and it's amazing the quantity.
Yeah, it is. It's overwhelming. I've been working with some SMU human rights students recently, and they are volunteering to help with this project. And one of the things that I asked for help with was photographing and cataloging some of the signs, because, as I mentioned, it's a never-ending thing. We have a database, and so we're always adding signs to the database. Um, and I forget just how powerful they are because I am around them all the time. I'm in my office at school. There's 5 of them in the window right here. There's these 3 hanging out right here. There's probably some in a stack behind me as well. They're just all over my life. They're all over. And the students who were helping me photograph these signs, and it's just one after another, one after another. We stopped and talked about that because they were like, wow, this is heavy to read these signs one after another. But you may remember in the movie Signs of Humanity in Chicago, I was talking to these 2 younger guys, and one of the guys, when we came up on them, he was literally drawing a sign and lettering it and coloring it in. And so we shot some footage while he was doing that. And I have had the experience many times of watching people either in the midst of making a sign. I've bought signs that were halfway done from people. And then you ask about signs that really stand out to me. Another one that we bought on this cross-country trip was in Las Vegas. There's a guy named Michael, and again, if you see the movie, you'll see him. He looks like a movie star, except for the fact that his hands are crusty with white stuff in the middle of his fingers, but he's got a beautiful face, and he's just filthy. And really, I could tell he was intelligent, he was talking, but there was something in his voice, a lot of pain. And his sign, all it said, and all it says, because I still have this sign, is it says spare change. But it was written with a ballpoint pen. And to make letters readable from a car, how much ballpoint pen you got to do. And as a graphic designer, I totally pay attention to the lettering, and all that stuff is really powerful to me. And his sign to me is just filled with pain. And it has this really simple message. So that's one that really stands out to me. Another one is probably the person who I've had the longest or the deepest relationship after buying their sign is a guy named Eddie Dunn. And I bought his sign in downtown Philadelphia in 2014. His sign says, "What if God occasionally visits Earth disguised as a homeless person to see how charitable we are?" Completely hypothetical, of course. And so I buy this sign from him in 2014. And to make a really long story shorter, two years later, I'm doing a talk, and his sign is behind my head on a screen, and the photographer captures this image, and it's on Facebook. And I get a message from Eddie Dunn 2 years later saying, "Hey, dude, you may not remember me, but that was my sign that's in that picture." And then he goes on to tell me that what I didn't know when I bought the sign was that he was a heroin addict, that he's now been sober almost 2 years. He has reconnected with his son and his daughter, has a brand new grandson. In fact, I just heard he's had a second grandchild, like very recently. So Eddie and I start this online conversation. I happened to be going back to Philadelphia in 2016 for another exhibit. And I picked him up at the train station, took him to lunch, and I brought him to the exhibit. And he got to stand in front of his sign for the first time in 2 years, and he started weeping. He had put on about 30 pounds. He looked great, because when I met him, he was, he looked pretty rough. And since then, he and I were on a couple of panel discussions together with a group in Philadelphia. And then I was asked to do another TEDx talk in Dallas, and I invited him to come down and join me on stage. And so we did a TEDx talk together, and we're just we're friends now, and we're going to be friends, I think, as long as we're both around. But yeah, he's also one of those guys. I could call him right now and he would get on this Zoom call with you. He is so intent on giving back and helping. And so Eddie's son is one that has a very, very special place in my heart.
Wow.
You know,
And I can tell you 50 more stories.
and it's clear when you watch the movie, which is really well done, and you'll see if you go and search the movie, it's won many awards and been featured in several film festivals. But I was drawn to your ability to open and have candid conversations with the people that you met and encountered. And I know that can be very difficult. And to see you go literally across the United States having these conversations was very inspirational, because there's so many stigmas and there's a lot of uncomfortableness around interactions with people that are experiencing homelessness. What can you share that you've learned that may be of interest to our viewers on maybe how some of your opinions have changed over the last 27 years and what you've learned from the people that you've met, and some of their challenges, maybe some of the things that we just, as people that may not have those interactions, may not understand?
Well, I think the biggest one, and you kind of alluded to that, is that they are human beings. And just like me, I've made mistakes. They've probably made mistakes. I've made weird choices that didn't always work out. They probably have too. The difference between us might be that I've got a safety net of friends and family that would, take care of me if something were to happen. I've, anecdotally, I've come to learn quite a bit about, just the population of folks experiencing homelessness at any given time, that a third of them are experiencing some form of mental illness. Obviously, that can manifest itself in addiction issues. And in fact, for a lot of people, drugs and alcohol may be their best way to cope, because they can't afford the health care or meds or whatever they might need to cope with their particular situation. I've learned not to trust the judgments that I tend to make up when I see somebody, and that I'm often wrong about the assumptions that I've made. And the stories that I've heard remind me that there's just so many different ways people end up in that situation. And I know Sammy, working at Vogel Alcove, as when we've talked about this, that there's just so many paths that can lead there, a significant healthcare issue, things that are totally out of our control that can happen. I've met quite a few guys that were felons that were on the street. A lot of women I met are fleeing domestic violence of one type or another. And some of them didn't want to be on camera for the documentary. I had a lot more conversations than you saw on the screen. But it's kept me very aware that there is no us and there's no us and them, that we're all human beings. And if I'm willing to see them and let them see me, whether or not I'm going to give them anything or give them money or anything in the way of help is not the point. The first and most important thing is, can I see them as a human being and let them see me? And if we decide to shake hands and I ask them their name and I decide to buy their sign and they decide to sell it, that's two people having an honest interaction that often for me has led to deeper conversations. And, I've just met so many fabulous people on the streets. Sometimes people ask me, have you ever been scared or whatever? And the truth is, when I first started, I was like, oh my God, am I going to get killed doing this? And very quickly that fear completely left. And I don't think in the 27 years I've been buying signs that I've even had somebody be rude to me. I mean, sometimes they don't want to sell the sign, but I just have had generally really positive experiences. And part of that's probably the fact that I'm willing to, just listen to them and not judge them in that moment. I think that's probably part of it. But yeah, I think I had a lot of stories in my head that I've since let go of.
You know, it's interesting what you mentioned about the support system. And, you know, Sammy and I, you know, we both, I guess, off and on worked for Vogel Alcove now for almost 8 years. And for people listening, Vogel Alcove is a charity here in Dallas that serves homeless children and families. And so our families aren't on the streets. They're typically in domestic violence centers, emergency shelters, or transitional housing programs. So it's a little bit different than chronic homeless, but a lot of similarities as well. But then Sammy and I have also had experience of working through different organizations and going out and serving folks that are living on the street. So we know exactly the kind of interactions and conversations you're having. But I'll never forget, Willie, one day I was giving a tour at Vogel Alcove, and a gentleman said to me, you know, I want to give money to support Vogel Alcove because these children are innocent. And it's not like these adults that are on the streets that have made all these bad decisions and ultimately forget about them. And I had to stop him and use that as a hoping a teachable opportunity to say that these adults that you're talking about very likely were the children that you're looking at right now. Or they were individuals that look just like me, that made the exact same mistakes that I've made in my life. And if you would like, I can share with you my journey from, say, high school to today. And you will hear a journey that probably should have me in jail, that should have me not working the job that I'm working, and in many cases, nowhere near the life that I experience now because of the decisions I made. But the difference was I had a community of people, family, friends, acquaintances, that were always able to support and care for me. And so often in my experience, whether it's family homelessness or a lot of the folks that we meet that are on the streets, that's not there for them. And they don't have that level of support system. And so when you talk about being able to treat someone like a human being and being able to have those general interactions, you can see it. It's real, it's true, and they're craving. They're just craving human interaction and care and love. And it's so obvious when you watch Signs of Humanity, and really, really a powerful point of that movie of just seeing those interactions with you and the people that you interview.
Well, you know, I've had the chance to work with lots, especially with men over the years. I've been part of a men's organization, and a group of us actually went into the Dallas County Jail for a number of years. And once a week, two of us would go in and lead a small group of inmates in a circle where we were trying to teach some really basic life skills and life lessons. Probably not unlike what you outline in y'all's book. I mean, that kind of thing. We had different themes each week. And you used the word crave. And I don't know that there was a group of men that I experienced the craving for male approval and wanting for us to see them. And, you know, to see some of these guys who at face value, if you saw them, one, dressed in what they wear while they're in jail, you know, in some cases tattooed head to toe, to see some of those men stand in the center of a circle of men, us and their fellow inmates, and just break down weeping because we were honoring them or seeing them in that moment. What has come to be clear to me is that most of the folks experiencing homelessness at some level did not get some basic sort of affirmation as they were growing up. And, you know, for all of my childhood things that weren't great, the truth is I did know at a deep level, my parents loved me, they provided for me, and even with all the unpleasant stuff about my childhood, I still at some level felt loved, and that's huge.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. I'm glad you shared that too, because you know, I knew you'd done a little bit of that work too, but the amount of impact that you must have seen just in that time that you did that, outside of maybe anything else in your life, yeah, I'm sure that, again, kind of relating back to the teachable moments and being part of that caregiver and that teacher was very impactful. And I think anyone that has the chance to maybe see those, you know, others in that same kind of light, or reframe their thinking, you know, when it comes to humanity all in one, I think is something that can really impact a person's life from now moving forward, and then even help them lead that down to their children or their grandchildren, whatever it may be, because people do change along the way, and you meet some pretty fascinating people throughout the course of your time here on Earth.
Well, and the cool thing about doing that movie and traveling across the country, I didn't know what we didn't know what we were going to come across and who we'd meet and all of that. And we got to have these amazing discussions and really in-depth discussions, longer than I typically have. As you said, the light turns green, you got to go, and here we would pull over and we would go have 20, 30, 40-minute conversations with people over and over, day after day. And I felt it was like another education for me.
And that's probably some of the conversations that, you think about your day-to-day interactions just with people in general. We don't get a chance to really sit down and have in-depth conversations most of the time, unless we make some time for it. And so I'm sure that some people, that might have been the longest conversation they had in quite their recent past that they knew about. So I think it's fascinating that the entirety of the concept would allow you to even break that open even more for them and allow them to probably even remember that interaction well beyond what you may have even intended to.
Well, I mean, this seems so simple and so basic, but one of the questions, and in the movie, you probably, I don't remember how many times I say this, but I typically will ask them their name right after we meet, and hey, can I buy your sign? What's your name? And I remember one guy telling me, nobody's asked me my name in 3 years.
Wow.
And I was just like, it's those little things that I just take for granted because I'm lucky to have, a crazy good support network of friends and family. And I can't imagine what it must be like to be on the street day after day, trying to survive. And then at the same time, not having any of that basic sort of human affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of your amazing group of friends and family and support system, Sammy, I'll start the introduction of this, and then I'd like to let you maybe share your thoughts. But was it a year ago, Willie, that you turned 60 years old?
Yes, it was. Thanks for reminding me, Greg.
Well, you don't look it, you don't act it, but even I don't know. I'm a big believer in that. As we get older, if we approach life the right way, it just gets better. And I think you're an absolute testament to that. And I, along with Sammy, attended your 60th birthday party. And Willie, I would lie to you if I told you a number of how many birthday parties I've been to in my life, but it is numerous. And I can tell you, though, with honesty, that I have never been more impacted, impressed, and walked away from a birthday party saying these words: that was the best birthday party I've ever been to. And
wow.
I'll let Sammy talk a little bit about why that's the case. We talked about it all the way home as we drove together, but to see the people in your life that came together, and not just to celebrate a birthday because it's a fun party, to have a great time, to have community, to have relationships. But then there was a point in the evening where people just took time to share about how important you were to them in their lives. And it was much more than just the standards. Man, Willie's just a great guy, and man, he's a fun guy to hang out with. It was some sincere, amazing things that people said. And it was people from all aspects of your life, including students. And it just made a profound impact on me. And Sammy, I'd love for you to share maybe some of your testimony from that evening, but it was such a special experience for me to witness.
Yeah, when we got the invite to go, number one, I was like, yeah, absolutely. I couldn't wait to attend, because not only I know that you like to have a good time, you like to have fun, and I was really excited to be able to take part of that celebration. And I believe it was a secret, right? The entire thing was planned secretly.
Well, the party wasn't a secret, but there were aspects of it. Like, I don't know if you remember, the only gift that was basically allowed was people could buy a homeless sign and bring
Yes.
it to the party. And along with the story of buying it, that blew me away because, I mean, all those signs with the stories clipped to them was, just kind of blew me away.
Yeah, I took Greg as my plus one, obviously because he knows you, and I wanted to loop him in, and frankly, we do a lot of stuff together anyway. So so it's a great night out, and when we got there, I think the word that best describes the party for me was spectrum, and the reason I say that was because that's what I felt like. It was people that I knew, it was people that I had seen, it was people that were young. There were obviously students, people that were, on the other end of the age spectrum as well. So people from all walks of life, people from all colors, people from all anywhere. And to see the fabric of people that were there with one common thread was knowing you and interacting with you just really blew me away too, because I instantly felt connected to everyone else that was there. It's like I felt like I was part of this secret society of friends of Willie that we've all had these interactions with, and there's people that I knew very well, and I was like, you know Willie? It's like, you know Willie? So it was a really cool experience. But to say that like it was walking into a scripted movie, like was something that Greg and I talked about, it would do it very little justice, because I know there was poetry, there was singing, heartfelt singing, there was a display of slideshow from pictures you've taken throughout your life. And I want to say, I think you're the guy that invented selfies, because I saw so many pictures of you with people, all smiling for the most part, all smiling throughout the whole time. But then just the genuine love and interaction. It, again, like great food, great dance, great, beverages and everything together in this really unique setting that kind of walked out of there. And I think Greg and I didn't even say anything on our walk to the parking lot. We're just like, got in the car and like, wow, that was just, it was amazing. So one, I want to say to everyone that helped make that an amazing birthday for you. I can only imagine how much it impacted you, but I'd love to hear just kind of your take on that night, because I'm sure it was an overwhelming amount of love that you were receiving. But tell us a little bit more about that evening.
Yeah, it was, so there's a lot about it that was a surprise. And you're absolutely right. There were people there I've known for 40 years, a couple of my oldest friends on the planet. And then some students, who wasn't even aware they were in Dallas. They were, they now live in New York and just happened to be there. So there was a lot that was surprise to me, and hearing people's words was overwhelming. I mean, that for me, that was probably the word I'd use for the night. I was so overwhelmed by just the words and the emotion that I felt being there. And yeah, it was a cool spot. We were down in a really kind of very edgy part of Dallas where there's a lot of texture. So it was a cool place, and they had decorated it really cool, and Justin was there cooking, and the food was outstanding, and but it was mostly just the people and seeing all these people. And I will say this, and I don't know why necessarily, but I have always been, I really have loved connecting people. And so that party in some ways was a representation of people from all walks. There was, there's all the groups that I'm part of a lesbian group that they've called me an honorary lesbian, and they were just yelling, "The lesbians are here!" And I was like, "Oh God!" But it was like there were people from the agency world, and people from the school world and the homeless world, and it was just, yeah, seeing all of that together was super awesome. And I felt very honored by the whole thing. And like you said, there were some people that came up and did some performance, spoken word stuff that also kind of blew me away.
In our book, Willie, we we have a chapter on relationships. And one of the examples that we share is, I guess it was Harvard University several years ago, released the outcome of a study that they had done for the past 80 years on, what are the biggest variables that go into a person's life in terms of joy and happiness and those type of things. And without going into a lot of detail, it ultimately came down to the quality of relationships in a person's life, those close relationships. And it was incredible. And I think Sammy and I talked about this a lot as well, because all these people that were there knew you. The majority of those people there didn't necessarily know all of each other. And so typically when you find yourself at an event where it's a lot of different people, your conversations are about sports and the weather and what's going on in the city or the biggest news, the biggest news of the day. And every conversation that I think I had the entire night was all about Willie and all about you and what you've done and the impact that you've had on their lives. And that almost became kind of the, how is the weather? It was, how has Willie been a part of your life? And I've never been in any type of situation where people responded that way, or that was just kind of the vibe of the event. And it just showed clearly that you're a person that puts value into relationships. And like you mentioned about being a connector, it was just so clear. And so I guess my question to you is, and I think a lot of it probably just comes natural, but how do you prioritize relationships in your lives? And what are some of the things that you do to make those connections really last, where you'll have someone come in from New York to be a part of your party?
Well, first of all, you're kind of getting me stirred up. So I'm trying to hold it together because it is very moving to me, to be loved so much, and I really feel very fortunate with that. I think, I don't know that a real elegant answer to that question. I will say this, that, I described being in therapy, when my first marriage was falling apart, I started doing therapy at a really deep level, and I got in touch with all the old feelings, and I somehow intuitively knew that this was something that really, that it was important in my life to do this work. And I literally spent the next 20 years doing that work in one form or another. And I was pretty fearless about it. I went to places that were scary to go, and I did work that was scary to do. And I think what I came out of that with was a certain amount of willingness to see myself, and I guess what I would say is that when I am in relationship with people, I'm not interested necessarily in the weather or sports or crap like that. When we go have coffee, we're pretty much into it pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my students joke that, students and former employees joke that people, when they're with me, their tears are usually shed. And I think that there's some truth to that, because I like to get at it. I mean, I want to hear what's really going on. I want to know how people really are doing, and I want them to know how I'm really doing. And so I guess some of it's just comfort with having done that for a long time now, and life's short. It's way too short to spend a lot of time talking about nonsense, So I think that's part of it.
Can we put that on a T-shirt?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. But yeah, it's, I don't know really how to answer that question. That's a really tough question, but I do know relationships.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
Well, people matter to me, and that's always been, for me, that's always been the most important thing. I've never really been drawn to material stuff a lot and all of that. It's just experiences and people. And so,
Love
yeah.
that.
And I am a very much a stay in touch with people, and if I don't hear from somebody in a long time, I'm likely the one that will reach out. Not always, but it matters to me. So.
Man, I can't even tell. People that are going to be watching this are just going to be probably looking at me and just laughing at how goofy of a grin I have on my face, because it's everything you again, it goes back to my genuine comment, because I can remember the times in which, you know, we've had interactions, be it from an art installation, at a giant event for Vogel Alcove, or you know, again, pancakes on me this time, that we're going to have again soon. There's just, it makes me smile and makes me know that again, that there's genuine people that are out there, and people like you that have an impact. And you know, right now we're in this crazy world, like the things have been different. We led this show with, you know, times have changed dramatically from 6, 7, 8 months ago, whatever it was. And you know, to know that there's still people out there that are not too worried about all the drama, that aren't too worried about all the things that a lot of people are spending a lot of time on now, but that people still care about other people during this time. And it's not just about themselves, but it's also about other people. I think it's a pretty impactful message. And again, I'm just cheesing from ear to ear, just thinking about that.
Well, you know, I read one article that homelessness in the US may increase by 45% because of this pandemic. Um, I don't know that there's ever been a better time for us to remember that we're all humans, and, you know, to look and see each other. I actually think in some of the silver linings of this whole COVID-19 situation is that a lot of people are reassessing. I think the things you guys talk about in your book, those touch points, those are things I think people are figuring out right now. What really matters? And some of it's tactical about workplace and do I need to be in the office and that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of it's about the relationships they're in and the work they're doing. And is this purposeful work? Is it meaningful? And so I think there's a lot of reassessing happening, and I think that's a good thing.
You know, and that kind of leads into, Willie, as we start to end our time together, we have a couple questions that we wanted to end on, that we're asking everyone that we interview. And the first one kind of goes along with what you've been talking about, but really during your life, are there certain actions or methods or lessons that you've learned in terms of self-development and growth that you feel have made a big impact in who you are today?
You know, facing fear is one of those, and it's not denying fear, because I'm scared a lot. Uh, but one of the lessons I think I've learned, and there's an old, I think it's an African tale about the running toward the roar. And it's a story about lions and how the male lions would often, when they were a little feeble and maybe they weren't quite as fast as they used to be, they would lie in wait. And the females, the younger, fitter lions, would sometimes get behind the herd of gazelles and cause them to run. And then the big male lions would get up and start roaring. And that would typically scare the gazelles back into the lions that could actually catch them. But the phrase run toward the roar was about, if you face that fear that's in front of you, the chances are actually you're going to come out of it. And I'm probably butchering that story, but you get the gist of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say that running toward the roar, when I feel that little itch inside of me that I'm a little nervous, I'm scared, something's coming up, that's a signal typically to me that there's some learning ahead and there's something golden to pay attention to. So that's one. And I think, you know, the other one we've kind of already talked about, but I think, you know, just remembering everybody is struggling. Everybody's got stuff they're going through, and whether they're on the corner with a sign or whether they're a student in my class, to have compassion and empathy, and just remember that. It's so easy to look at somebody and write them off or whatever. And yeah, I just hope nobody does that to me. So
One of the other questions we wanted to ask was, you know, you've given us so much already, but I wanted to ask you this, was, can you share some advice that has stuck with you over the years?
Well, there's some advice I wish I had gotten. My students sometimes will ask, so if you could go back, what would you do different, et cetera. And one of the pieces of advice I give out a lot, especially to my students, is to be bold, to scare yourself by being willing to take bigger risks. And if I could go back, that's one of the things I wish somebody had encouraged me to do. Yeah, being bold, and then on the other hand, being kind, that's a pretty powerful combo, I think.
That's
Speaking
awesome.
of giving advice to your former self, this is a little bit of an interesting question, Willie. What advice today would you give to your future self 10 years from now?
I would urge myself to remember to be kind to myself, that loving me is the first step to me being able to love anybody else. I tend to be a pretty rough critic to myself. And I hope that 10 years from now, I'm even better at loving myself.
That's just beautiful statements.
And I'm quiet right now, Willie, because I'm writing down a lot of what you're saying.
Doing the exact same thing. I think it's something that I took a long time ago. I'm a dad. I've got 2 young daughters, and something that
they're adorable, by the way.
I think you saw my video that we made, right?
I did. I was smiling and warm and fuzzy.
To give the audience and Greg some context, we made a video, myself and my 2 daughters, where I was telling dad jokes, and they were rating me good or bad. And so it was yay, the boos, and I had to do some creative editing because they were a lot of fun, and they definitely stole the show. We'll get to share it with some people. So one, I was happy that I could leave that memory with them, but then hearing, Willie, that you enjoyed it, that means a lot to me too.
It was like way too much cuteness on the cuteness meter.
Yeah, I'm in trouble. That's all I know is I'm in a lot of trouble moving forward. Well, Willie, our time here, is just a snapshot in time. The time we spent over the course of this show speaking to you and picking your brain and asking you questions. I could keep you, and I know Greg could as well, keep you here for hours and hours and hours until the suns come up and the moons go down, and we'd still probably find something to talk about that would be unique and interesting, because we didn't even get into the fact that you have challenged us to racquetball at any point in time, and will beat us.
Which I played about an hour and a half ago, by the way.
Yeah. So I knew that was something that's still high on the list. So we will do that as well. But I can't express the amount of gratitude that I have for the ability to get to know you. And I know that may sound cheesy to a lot of people, but not only the fact to know you, but the chance to get to know you has been impactful in my life. You're one of my favorite people that I've encountered, and you're unique, and you're interesting, and you're kind, and you're careful, and you're exciting, and you're just one of those people that I hope that people have a chance to not only interact with you, but interact with the people that you've been able to impact and engage with throughout your life as well. And so I'm happy to call you a friend. I'm happy to call you a mentor. I'm happy to call on you when I need anything. I feel like I can do that. And I appreciate your time spent with us today, because I know you're a very busy guy. And but again, I can't tell you how much, just thank you very much for taking part of this.
Yeah, I'm overwhelmed by your kind words, man. I'm honored to do this, and it's actually a lot of fun. You've actually gotten me to say some stuff I don't think I've ever said before, which, and I never expected y'all to talk about my birthday party. So that was, another thing that kind of caught me off guard. But yeah, and I really feel like from the minute Sammy and I met, not just the hug, but I think there was a connection of the heart that has, never stopped. And Greg, I'm getting to know a little bit, and I'm excited to, obviously somebody who hangs out with Sammy so much has got to be all right. So it's good to get to know you better too.
Well,
Jury's still out.
one of the last things that we'll do in kind of wrapping up this show is we like to share actionable tips or takeaways from the conversation. And so I'll let Sammy maybe lead out. Sammy, do you have 2 or 3 takeaways that you've taken from the conversation today?
Yeah, I've got a whole notepad full of notes here that I've been scribbling and jotting down. But I won't hold you to any of those. My professor won't be grading my paper here. But there's 3 things that I touched on, and it's actionable tips but they're phrased as words. So number 1 is stay curious. I think that is an area in which one of the first things you led with was, I hope that people can remember that and question the why. And I'm a big why kind of guy, but I think that's a better way to say it. Like, stay curious is what I took from this. Number 2 is something that we talk a lot about the book and what the pursuit of growth is all about. But you mentioned learning throughout the entirety of the time we've spoken. So I just really, that's again, really leaves a lasting impact on me in our conversation that I hope that people take away as well, is that take time to continue to learn, see opportunities for learning and growth, which Greg and I talk a lot about. And then there was number 3 was actually 2 short phrases that you mentioned, was that you hope that we were able to see each other. And that was just impactful 3 words, because I think oftentimes we look at each other, but we don't see the other person. And, there's days in which there's good, there's days in which there's bad. Then there's days that are just days. But maybe there's times where you just need to remember that and see the other person. And then the last thing, this part of part 3 was, is it meaningful? And, being that in the work and the relationships and the time spent on whatever it may be, just make sure that it's meaningful. And I think that was a great piece of advice. So I think you can turn those into actions and things that people can take away from this conversation and really start to explore and really utilize in their day to day. So Greg, I'll pitch it back over to you as a in conclusion moment.
Yes, well, as you can imagine, we have many things that overlapped. And so I'll share 2 that really impacted me. Well, the first one is, for everyone listening, go to Amazon Prime and watch Signs of Humanity. It will do you well. Do it. And then Willie, there's so much that you talked about that I love, and I've got notes on several pages. But I want to focus on one thing, and it really impacted me when you said this, was when you start having that tickling of fear, you tell yourself that means there's something to learn ahead. Wow. I mean, as somebody who's researched and studies and works to overcome fear in my life and to help other people get to root issues and understanding how to approach fears and run towards the roar like you talked about, I've never come across anyone or read anyone who's talked about it like you just did. And that gave me chills when I heard you say that. Fear means there's a learning opportunity ahead. Powerful.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that comes from a lot of learning.
Well, again, this has been a lot of fun. We appreciate it. Everything. Upon our exit here, I wanted to just ask if you had anything else you wanted the audience to know. Was there any, and this is your time to chime from the rooftops about anything from promotional items? Do you want, where should people find you online? Is there anything else that you want to help promote, be it a show, be it your movie, whatever it is, we're open.
I'd say the only 2 things in terms of finding out more about the project, watching Signs of Humanity on Amazon, and the website weareallhomeless.org. I think I'm very easy to reach through that. But the takeaway I'd want everybody to just take with them is to love yourself.
It's very powerful.
Love that.
Period.
Willie, this was fun, man. This was awesome. This is better than what I could possibly have expected. Thank you for your time. Much love
My
for
pleasure.
everything that you do. And let's do this again.
Yeah.
I'd be okay if pancakes are involved. I'm just saying.
Those are on me. Yeah, for sure.
So, Sammy, wherever he's at on your screen, I like that.
So I want to do something very 2020 while we have you here on the show. I'm going to take a screenshot so that we can have this as part of the cover for our show. So if you would, do your best impression of what you think is right for this picture. And I will tell you that I will count us down in 3, 2, 1.
I took 1, 2. And you're right. I did invent the fucking selfie, by the way. That's in one of my bios. That's literally in one of my bios.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Willie, thank you so much. Again, appreciate it. I will be in touch. Well, Greg and I will both be in touch with a thank you, but then also just for those pancakes and for some other time that we can talk, because we've got a lot of stuff going on, and we'd love for you to be part of it.
Same.
All
yeah.
right.
You guys have a great evening, and thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you again, Willie. Really, really appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much.
Totally welcome, man. It was super fun. Bye.
Bye.
Adios.